You're listening to episode 304 of Mitolife Radio. I'm Matt Blackburn, and today I'm interviewing Dr. Alexander Wunsch. I found him many years ago on Vimeo. He had his lectures posted on there on photobiomodulation and photobiology. That's how light affects living organisms. And this was back around 2016 when I was getting into blue light blocking glasses and getting outside in the morning to get sun in my eyes and cold plunging, naked sunbathing, watching the sunset. While there were other names in the health community talking about this subject, I thought that the way that Dr. Alexander did it was very eloquent and it all made sense to me. So a recent guest that I had on the show, Matt Maruca, has started to work with Dr. Alexander on some new exciting technologies, and he connected me with him, and now the show was born. I would consider Dr. Alexander a light purist. He's very strict. There's a lot of health technologies, light devices out there. And I would say I'm somewhere in the middle, but a lot of the times during the show, like near the end, I brought up his thoughts on narrowband ultraviolet light therapy, and he pretty much rolled his eyes. So you will find the show interesting, whether you are a novice with the subject or a veteran, because there's just a lot of information in here. He talks about the two different types of melanin, how UV light can be life-threatening, how the different races differ in their sun exposure. He talks about haplotypes a little bit, but more delves into the different melanin types called pheomelanin and eumelanin. I ask him his thoughts on photoaging, vitamin D, how long to expose yourself to sunlight. He shares his thoughts on sunscreen. I ask him about photosensitizers and his thoughts on lipofuscin. He talks about how sunlight is damaging potentially behind a window, whether that's in your home or in your car. I ask him about seed oils and polyunsaturated fatty acids in relation to light exposure. I ask him about crystal singing bowls, sauna therapy, brainwave altering handheld devices. He talked about the device called the Brain Man that he invented many years ago, why he's not a fan of red light therapy devices, and a lot more. So enjoy the show. Here is Dr. Alexander Wunsch. All right. We are here with Dr. Alexander Wunsch. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Matt.
Yeah, we just solved some hopefully technical difficulties. You're on the other side of the planet. Are you in Germany, correct?
Yes.
That's quite a ways from North Idaho, where I'm at. So it's, internet's pretty amazing. But yeah, Matt Maruca connected us, and I just had him on my podcast last week, and we talked about the problems with LED lighting. And I listened to the show that you had with him in person. I think it was 4 hours long, and that was really interesting. Yeah, I learned a lot from that one, and I just love how detailed you are, but also how you break things down in an easy to understand way, because this whole topic of phototherapy, photobiology, and just light in general, it's very complex, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, depending on the depth you're looking at it, of course, because in a way it's pretty basic. Without light, we wouldn't be here. And light was our evolutionary companion since the very beginning of life. And so we were able, or our ancestors and predecessors were able to benefit from light without knowing anything. And the point is that in our civilization, we kind of lost a lot of knowledge about light. Maybe there is a plan behind it. I don't know.
Yeah. One of the questions this morning as I was meditating on our talk, just I'm in the nutrition space, but I look at, I've been talking about light for way less than you. I mean, 5 or 6 years, but I've been just sharing that it's as important as nutrition to people in the health community. But I'm wondering your thoughts, if you had to throw out a percentage, how many people, like what percentage of people on Earth have a dysfunctional relationship with light?
I think I can't tell you uh, number in numbers, but I think each and everyone who is living in modern civilization has an issue with light, because normally you would say we are exposed to artificial lighting 90 to 95% of our time. Most of us, or many of us, are staying indoors. So they are inevitably exposed to artificial lighting. And even behind the windows, you are exposed to artificial light, because windows change the quality of light, of daylight, significantly. Yeah, so I think it's a problem for all of us who own a computer, who live in civilized areas. In modern, our modern life goes along with the kind of lack of natural high quality light.
And do you think it's more of an issue with people like myself in a northern latitude? Like it's been gloomy for days up here in Idaho versus someone, in Southern California or Texas where there's sun almost year round. Because I'm just very aware of, wintertime, especially. And when I'm making breakfast, turning on a bright light, I have kind of color changing lights with different lux and different color temperature, excuse me. So you can change the Kelvin of it to 3 different
Mhm.
settings. Um, and so I'll do kind of the sunrise setting in the morning, but it's still, I know that it can't mimic sunlight exactly, right? It's not a replacement. It just, but that gets really
Yeah, it
tricky.
doesn't have the advantages of sunlight, but it has the negative impact still. Um, Playing with color temperature, in my understanding, or from my point of view, is not a good idea as long as you stay indoors. Um, Indoors, I would recommend to expose yourself to cave lighting, which is fire. And this is represented by maximally 2700 Kelvin. Any level above warm white of 2700 goes along with the risk of triggering hormones, which is not a good idea as long as you stay inside. So the response to cold white light, as you have it outdoors under blue sky conditions, this hormonal response is tailor-made for staying outdoors and being motorically active. Once you're indoors, you are restricted in your motorical activities. And in this context, it's probably deleterious to increase the hormones which are necessary for increased action. So to name them, we are talking about catecholamines, we're talking about stress hormones, we're talking about cortisol, serotonin, dopamine, and adrenaline and noradrenaline. And these hormones are made for being motorically active. And in nature, it's it makes sense. But sitting in front of your display and in front of your keyboard, it doesn't really make sense because you don't need a lot of metabolical power, glucose, and so on when you only operate a keyboard.
Mm-hmm. So back in the day, evolutionarily, people in environments like myself, where there's 4 seasons and you have a true winter with snow and lack of UV and not a lot of infrared, your understanding is we were kind of in caves using basically like bonfires and having, fires going um, a lot, and that was the solution. I mean, there's theories that we were much more advanced than we understand back in the day, Atlantis talk and stuff like that, where we did have artificial lighting when we think we didn't, but we don't have to go there. But is your understanding that it was firelight that was used as we were evolving? And
I think that the speed of human evolution is always much, much slower than the speed of technological development and advancement. So even if we had, for example, in Egypt, there is a temple where you can see some tubes which look like incandescent lamps of a bigger size, and some battery. The Baghdad battery, for example, would have been able to produce electricity in order to drive these things. And yeah, of course, we don't know if they really built the pyramids with some other lighting than electric than fire. But what we can tell is that the lighting industry doesn't matter if we talk about electrical lighting or incandescent or even burning wood or oil or whatever. There was a lighting industry for sure. And if you want to build pyramids, you need someone who provides the torches and whatever you are using. But normally the speed of evolution in technology is much higher than the speed of evolution in our physical bodies. So what we can tell is that for about 500,000 to 2 million years ago, our ancestors were able to handle fire, at least if they were able to ignite it. We talk about probably 200,000 or 500,000. So scientists are not sure about that. But what we can tell is that we have been most of our ancestors, and for most of the time, we had been exposed to incandescent light or to thermal light, which represented a kind of company of heat and illumination or brightness. So the thermal light sources, those are the natural ones. And in the meantime, we left these thermal light sources behind, except when we are exposing ourselves to sunlight. This is still a thermal light source. But all the artificial light sources, which are acting upon us for 90% of our lifetime, they are cold light sources in the meantime. And so their spectrum is kind of random or arbitrary. It's not it's not a logic behind that. There is a plan from an engineer, for example, who says or thinks, oh, let's increase the color temperature because this results in a biological effect in terms of release of certain hormones, or in terms of blocking the release of certain hormones as well, depending on the daytime you are using this light. So there is a concept from someone, and the question is if this concept is correct or incorrect. And the concepts of nature and the adaptation we went throughout the course of evolution, this is something completely different. So there is one part which is fully naturally logic, biologic, And the other thing is the brainchild of some engineer or inventor or whatever. So you know how it works, how it goes in science. They tell us a lot of things, and it appears that they are 100% sure about it. And after the latest finding, the whole concept is falling together and does not hold anymore. And so my approach is always look into nature and try to understand what nature does. And this at least is a kind of guarantee that you stay within the framework where we can tell that our body is capable of handling the challenges, which is not necessarily true for all these different brainchilds.
That's great. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if someone's in a nice environment where where my family lives in San Diego, California, generally every morning you could walk out and there's the sun that's out. Even on a gloomy day, there's just a lot more of it than up here. The easy thing to do for most people, my situation's a little more tricky, is just walk outside first thing in the morning without glasses and contacts on. Would you agree with that?
That it's a good idea to
set your circadian rhythm and the hormones that you talked about, get those into balance just by walking outside first thing in the morning to give your body the signal and your brain the signal what time of day it is.
So I would not say, or I would not fully agree that it already triggers the hormones of daytime activities. But I would fully agree that the sunrise and sunset gives you a signal or an impulse that your system has to change the gears. So if we look at the circadian rhythm, we have this relaxation phase during nighttime, and we have this activation phase during daytime. And making it simple, during nighttime, the parasympathetic system prevails and is more active, and during daytime, the sympathetic system. And the red, the transition, the zero crossing in this natural oscillation comes along with red. So the sky turns red during sunrise, and the sky turns red during sunset. So this is the natural color signal that the next phase, the next opposite phase, is coming up. And from that perspective, I would fully agree that it's a good idea to give yourself, to give your system this color signal. Regarding the stress hormone levels, for example, they already start around 4 a.m. or good time before you have to get up. Otherwise, your circulatory system wouldn't be able to follow or to serve you as it should. But there is a basic level of stress hormones, and there is a kind of defensive level of stress hormones, defensive regarding the potential damage which can occur during daytime if the sun is up and if the sun is high, which means when the color changes from red into bright sky blue hue, the amount of shortwave radiation also increases. And the stress hormones, they are supporting the organism in the skin, but also systemically, to counteract the threats which directly result from high levels of ultraviolet, especially ultraviolet B. Ultraviolet B is the most significant, or causes the most significant reactions, which can even become very threatening, so life-threatening even. And in order to be prepared, there has to be an additional capacity of releasing these hormones, which are probably even mainly made for handling the daylight threats we automatically face when we are outside. Not in places, for example, where I live, but in those places when you think of humans come out of Africa, then you understand better the intensity and the problems with the environmental sunlight. And nowadays, with our globalization, we often have the problem that large groups of people have not enough sunlight and others have too much. And those who don't have enough sunlight also live in situations where they cannot afford staying outside when it's best. So if you are in a working situation, working from 9 to 5, it's hard to step outside almost naked during noontime. And so, it already becomes clear that there is no general rule on that. And the mobility, which is kind of linked with our modern lifestyle, sets even more problems, potential problems, which means to fully adapt and diligently adapt to the environmental conditions, lighting conditions, is definitely a challenge. And it's more a challenge today compared to 100 years in the past, or even longer.
Yeah, every time I go to a grocery store or a big box store and I see the cashier and I'm speaking with them and I look at their body shape, but not judgmental, but just observing people in my environment, most people are unhealthy, and whether it's excess weight or mood disorders, depression or anxiety or whatever, it's just so prevalent. And like you said, I think they're locked in financially. I mean, if they're a cashier at Walmart, they can't on their lunch break go outside and get naked because they'll get arrested.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's it's a huge missing piece, I think, to health. And it's such an easy one to change, because I think people tend to think, you need to spend a lot of money, but there's a lot of things you could do before buying a water filter, or these things that you can spend money on. Most of this stuff is free, right? It's just the timing aspect of doing it. I wanted to ask you about haplotypes. Like I asked my guest yesterday about this, Sarah Kleiner, and I wanted to ask you, just have you researched, because I'm sure we'll talk about melanin, and obviously you mentioned African Americans have more melanin, and that's, they have dark skin and they can handle more sunlight, whereas people like us,
they don't even have more melanin, by the way.
Oh, interesting.
It's just located in different layers of the skin, and it's not that you're addressing something very, very difficult or complex, because the pigmentation, the whole melanin thing is it's a challenge to understand it correctly. For example, there are two types of melanin. You are aware of that, I guess.
Heard of that?
The
Yeah.
eumelanin and the pheomelanin. So the Celtic type, with red hair and green eyes and pale skin, or kind of even reddish skin, they have large amounts of pheomelanin, and only small amounts of eumelanin, if they have eumelanin at all. And the skin types, according to Fitzpatrick, which lie in between skin type 1 and skin type 6, they normally possess these two types of melanin in different ratios. And the problem with the pheomelanin is that it's kind of almost invisible. So it can be easily masked by the eumelanin, because the eumelanin is brownish black, and the pheomelanin is kind of reddish to almost colorless. And the difference is that the eumelanin quenches or absorbs the UV radiation and dissipates it in the network of melanin, stores it, and gives it off after a certain time under controlled dose conditions. So it kind of provides an optimal concentration of reactive oxygen species, which are necessary for proper adaptation. And the pheomelanin is not able to store the UV radiation and to release the reactive oxygen species over a long time, but kind of immediately. So the pheomelanin is a photosensitizer, which produces excessive amounts of reactive oxygen species. And for the Celtic type, it's easy to feel. They normally do not feel comfortable when they are exposed to sunlight. That the problem are all the other skin types in between 1 and 6, because they might have the sensitivity of a Celtic skin type, but from the appearance, they look, for example, like a skin type 3 or even 4. So because their pheomelanin is masked by the also existing melanin. And in the end, scientists came to the conclusion there are just two types of people. Those who are not able to digest sunlight in a good way, and the others who are able to withstand the UV stress. And it is almost impossible at the moment, at least. There are no tests which are known to me, which would be widely available to distinguish your personal, or to describe your personal ratio between eumelanin and pheomelanin. So this is something which makes it kind of problematic. And then we also have this melanocortin receptor type 1 and other types. We have this pituitary gland signaling or hormone precursor cascades. You don't find them only in your midbrain or in the pituitary gland. You also find them in accessory systems in your skin. Here we are talking about the pro-opiomelanocortin system, which is a precursor molecule which can be cut into different types of bits and pieces, which all are capable of contributing to your digestive capacity for sunlight or ultraviolet light. And all these aspects, they contribute to, or they form your overall capacity to digest and handle solar radiation. And so this makes it very, very difficult to give recommendations to someone just by looking at him or her. The appearance doesn't give the information you really need in order to tell if it's beneficial or detrimental to expose yourself to the sunlight. And the problem is always the delay, which is a keyword for example, the sunburn or the solar erythema, but it's also a keyword for development of skin aging or even skin cancer, which still can result from overexposure. So it's not here again. We would have to differentiate between the white skin cancer. It is the sometimes the words are basalioma and spinalioma would be the white types, and they are definitely dependent on your personal exposure, and they also depend on the pheomelanin melanin ratio. And where I think the bad guy in the topic of skin cancer is the melanoma. And many scientists, dermatologists are claiming that melanoma is caused by sunlight. But for example, if someone experiences chemotherapy or other reasons why the immune system is damaged, they have a highly increased risk of developing melanoma. So melanoma is probably more a problem of the immune system. And so it's very difficult to tell if it's really the sun or if it's probably some other aspect concerning the prevalence for developing melanoma. For example, there is a study, or there is a group of scientists who could show that the unrolling of the frequency modulation network went along with an increase of malignant melanoma of the skin. So one important study here is melanoma of the skin, not a sunshine story, because it could also come from the 1 meter broadcasting band, where our body reacts in a way we still have not fully understood. And so what we can say is, for example, the vitamin D production in the skin most probably is reducing the risk for malignant melanoma. But sunlight exposure, on the other hand, excessive sunlight exposure, increases your risk for the white skin cancers. And the keyword delay is where I came from now in this part of our evaluation. If you had this overdose, will be presented to you 20, 30, 40 years later. So this time delay makes it impossible to make corrections in your personal past times. So it's important to kind of be aware of the potential benefits, but also the potential risks which come along when you try to kind of level yourself out in an optimal way using sunlight.
Are there any, like I know there are a lot of genetic tests now, are there any tests that you're aware of where you can tell not only your pheomelanin to eumelanin ratio or how much you have of each, but also the, as you mentioned, the melanocorpin types and all of the other factors that play into our personal ability to handle UV radiation? Are there any tests out there that you're aware of? Or if not, do you think there will be at some point where we can really pinpoint and, you know,
the classical test where you don't need a laboratory is still the best. expose yourself to the sunlight during noontime, and only if your shadow is shorter than you are tall. When you're standing upright, measure your shadow length and measure your height. And if the shadow is shorter than your height, then there is most probably enough UVB in the radiation to produce vitamin D and to also trigger all these other cascades, reaction cascades, which you can expect from sunlight. Then you should expose yourself during high noon, because when the sun is on the highest elevation angle, the time for sufficient vitamin D production is the shortest. And so your risk is also the shortest, but only if you limit the exposure to, let's say, in the first run, 3 to 5 minutes. Then step out of the sun and evaluate how your skin feels and looks after a few hours. If there is no reddishness, no erythema, no big difference when you compress your underarm with your thumb and let go, so you would see the refill in the capillary system with this thumb test. And if there is no excessive erythema or reddening of the skin, you can slightly increase the exposure the next day. And if you increase the exposure incrementally, just by a few minutes, you will reach a tolerance and an adaptation in your skin, which has a much higher quality compared to what happens when you're using suntan lotion. Because suntan lotion contains almost always these chemical substances which respond to sunlight with the production of reactive oxygen species in a ratio which is at least 10, 20, 100 times higher compared to what would happen if your own melanin is responsible for the digestion of the UVB radiation, for example. And the big difference is that these chemical absorbers, they are endocrine disruptors, which prevent your skin from becoming thicker. So the solar radiation induced callosity or thickening of the skin, which is the normal reaction, is hampered or hindered or blocked. So after the use of suntan lotion, your skin looks colorful, kind of you get a tan, but you don't get the additional layers in your epidermis, which are responsible for optimal protection of the basal membrane and the epidermal structures and even dermal structures. And so this is the big difference. It takes a little bit more time, and it's a little bit more, let's say, it requires more awareness to build up a summer skin. But in former times, let's say 100 years ago, researchers were able to demonstrate that you can achieve solar radiation protective factors of 50 to 100. Imagine that from diligent dosing of summer sun.
Wow.
And this is a true protection factor. And anything else which is kind of controlled via these suntan lotions and the chemical absorbers, it gives you, or it kind of gives you a feeling of being on the safer side, but the opposite is true. And so the test is the erythema test, and to go incrementally and avoid if you stay at a lower dose, at a lower level with each increment, you might need a week longer for a sufficient tan, probably. But this is the benefits from the low dose are much, much higher than the risks from a slightly too high dose, on the other hand.
I see. Yeah, that kind of leads to my question that I was going to ask you, if there are any downsides to certain skin types building a tan in the summer, like as far as photo aging or decrease in the longevity of the skin. And my understanding of what you just said is the answer would be no, as long as you walk that fine line of not going slightly over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there will be in dermatology. It's an ongoing discussion. So some dermatologists and the WHO, World Health Organization, they operate on the concept that people are not the masses are not capable of showing controlled behavior and understanding what's going on. So just think about what we were talking about until now in our meeting. Complex is, I think, a correct description of what we are talking about. And if the concept is that people are not able to think complex thoughts, then the idea is, let's go the safe way and issue a global warning about solar exposure. And for example, some people have the tendency to overdo because they ignore the warning, and others are too cautious on the other hand. So the fine line, the golden center of the path is not the path where you find most of the people. And if you are in responsibility as a dermatologist or as the World Health Organization, I can easily understand why they try to go the safer way in order to issue the global warning. On the other hand, what the risk they have to live with is vitamin D deficiency and increase of civilization-related disorders, because sunlight for sure is able to lower blood pressure and to increase immune status or improve the immune functions and so on. So the systemic stress, circulatory diseases, immune disorders, even cancer, and so on. These are the problems which are not as clearly visible and provable compared to a skin burn or actinic keratosis or a skin cancer. So on one hand, we have the easy explanation with hidden risks. And on the other hand, we have the complex recommendation, which will not be understood by the majority of people, because 40% will overdo, 40% will kind of avoid completely, and only a small percentage is willing to dive into the complexity.
Yeah, that's a great point.
As I would just want to add that when people listen at you or listen to what you're saying, then this means you have a responsibility. And what I had to learn is that young people, for example, they are often not aware of what they have to expect when they are 20 years or 30 years older, because they have no clue what it means to become even 5 years older, because they are so in the now in a certain way. And so I feel responsible not to issue a global encouragement, which some people do. The more sun, the better. But we are talking about the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis here. And if the thesis is people don't have enough sunlight, which is for sure true for 90 to 95% of the modern population, then the antithesis is get as much sun as you can. But both standpoints are wrong. The synthesis is the next step after thesis, antithesis. The synthesis the has to come. And this is always not as easy as one of the first steps.
That's a really great point, because that's what moved me away from this whole topic about 4 or 5 years ago. I just got turned off to it because I saw people overdoing it, and I didn't want to be a part of that. And I've studied photoaging, and I wanted to ask you about photosensitizers. Like you mentioned, the pheomelanin has that property, but there's also like chlorophyll, resveratrol, curcumin, quercetin, beta carotene. There's a huge list, right, of things in both supplements and foods that have really complex relationships with light. One of the ones that I've focused on was lipofuscin, which is a really interesting, they call it age pigment, or it's in Stargardt's disease, kind of a rare condition, but it's like a mix of iron and metals. Usually there's copper in there, some iron, oxidized lipids, damaged mitochondria, damaged proteins, and it absorbs certain wavelengths and it releases certain wavelengths. And I feel like the photosensitizers topic is kind of a wild card in this whole topic of photobiology, because they can cause so many different effects, right? Depending on what supplements and diet someone's on and whether they've consumed. In my opinion, lipofuscin is largely caused by the excessive consumption of polyunsaturated fats in the absence of vitamin E to balance it out. But just curious, your
it's also called the age pigment. Or pigment of aging. So you find lipofuscin, you don't find it in young cells, in young organisms, but you find plenty of it in, for example, in the retina, in the retinal pigment epithelium, just as an example. And this again touches my topic of age-related macular degeneration. And the problem with these photon-related substances is that, for example, the rhodopsin, which is responsible for the vision, rhodopsin cycle is again a complex example for that one and the same substance can have a central effect for the vision process, but in the regeneration cycle, it also acts as a detrimental photosensitizer. And with a very complicated time pattern, so the intermediate products of rhodopsin, they absorb, they are present for different time slots from femtoseconds to several minutes. And each intermediate product, which lies on the way of regenerating the rhodopsin for the next vision task, each intermediate product is able to produce additional reactive oxygen species. So it's the same, it is the core or the heart of the vision process, but it's also the source for damaging reactive oxygen species. While the lipofuscin curve, response curve to different wavelengths, is a kind of linear curve. And the rhodopsin curve is kind of chopped curve with particular wavelengths where, for example, blue light and even green light is able to produce additional reactive oxygen stress.
Wow.
And I think this is also true for all these quenches, for all the photosensitizers, that they have capabilities of absorbing and removing stressful radiation. But on the other hand, if they are saturated, they can contribute to even increased production of damaging substances, reactive oxygen species in particular.
Does someone's vitamin A intake, because I know rhodopsin's built from vitamin A largely, right?
It contains vitamin A, yes. Mm-hmm.
So if someone's deficient in vitamin A, does it affect that rhodopsin cycle?
Yeah, it will contribute, for example, to something like night blindness. But on the other hand, if you have excessive vitamin A, I think some sort of lung cancer can be the negative outcome of it. And so everything which concerns reactive oxygen species and the antioxidant capabilities is subject to a certain risk if you, for example, increase the concentration of antioxidants. This will kind of disrupt the normal signal transduction, which is based on reactive oxygen species as well. So I call those reactive oxygen species Janus-headed molecules. The Roman god Janus, who had this friendly and the ugly face, depending on the point of view, or in particular, depending on the concentration and the location as well.
Years ago, I was camping, and it was during the phase when I was on the vegan diet, and I brought a juicer with me to the campsite, and I juiced, I think it was 5 or 10 pounds of carrots, and I went out on a little boat on a lake, and I must have been out in the sun for 3 hours, and I had not built up my skin like you described earlier with slowly increasing exposure, and I didn't get any sunburn, where if I didn't drink the carrot juice, I would have just had a definitely peeling, horrible sunburn. What was happening there? Was it the antioxidants or the beta carotene absorbing the light and the carrot juice? It was fascinating to me. It was like an internal sunscreen. I wasn't expecting that effect.
Yeah, the this is the reason why you did not um, experience a sunburn. Hmm. I have to switch over again to my other microphone. Oh, it doesn't work. So can you still hear me?
I can. Yep.
Okay. So yeah, but this doesn't mean that you can fully rely on this internal sunscreen. It probably only prevented you from developing a solar erythema or a sunburn, but other cellular reactions, like, for example, skin aging, could still have happened. So I think it makes absolutely a lot of sense that nature kind of takes certain wavelengths, which are the most problematic, and use them as detecting signals as well. So if you experience a sunburn, you learn your learning curve is much higher if compared to not experiencing a sunburn at all. And this is, for example, the problem we have to face when we are behind the window. You probably have seen the truck driver phase where you have one part which is aged, um, and the other part, the other half is not. This is the best example that behind the window pane, you have up to 80% of UVA radiation, but you have almost 0% of UVB radiation. So the warning signal is totally removed, but you can sit 5 hours behind the window pane without experiencing anything bad. But in fact, you get 4 hours of direct sunlight exposure for the UVA part, which is responsible for skin cancer, skin aging, and all these things.
Wow. Do you recommend cracking the window? I know on the freeway that's not enjoyable to do, but to allow the UVB through, because all it takes is a little crack for light to get in and bounce around, right?
Hmm.
Or is that a theory?
So normally you would one thing about UV people have to know, and this is that there is no shadow for UV. So when you think you sit, let's say, behind a wall or so, you think you sit in the shadow. For UV, this is not true. Because all the scattered radiation, the blue sky comes from scattered shortwave radiation and so on and so on. So you should never rely on shadow when you expose yourself to sunlight. You should not rely on the protective properties of windows. What you can rely upon is the protective property of chlorophyll. So if you are covered by or shielded by natural leaves from a tree, for example, if you are right in the middle of a forest, there is no risk of experiencing a sunburn as long as you are covered by green, because chlorophyll takes apart the short wavelengths and the long wavelengths, but not the near infrared. So normally in under the green roof, you have 5 times as much of near infrared radiation compared to the green you can visually detect. So this is the standard ratio. A fifth is visible, and 5 times more is invisible infrared radiation, which helps you to combat all the detrimental effects of other more aggressive parts of the spectrum.
Hmm. Last question on just the sensitivity aspect of whatever we consume, because that's just a fascinating topic to me. And you've probably seen the topic of seed oils growing, canola oil and just the awareness around, processed foods and the easily oxidized oils and uh, uh, basically excessive polyunsaturated fats increasing increasing sunburn. I mean, I've experienced it eating fried foods at a festival or something, or a Renaissance fair or something like that, and then getting a sunburn. Have you looked
Mhm.
into that relationship of, uh, eating a lot of processed foods, but specifically because the fats in those foods versus eating, saturated fat, say a steak or something cooked in butter or tallow, and having less of a reaction to UV? Because I've personally experienced that, and I don't know if it's just psychosomatic, but it
I
seems to
think
be.
what appears logical to me is that everything or anything which increases your reactive oxygen level kind of stresses your detox system in terms of making your antioxidant systems busy. And so they are not fully available for radiation detox. So there for sure is an interplay of nutritional behavior, which puts some stress on these antioxidant systems. Yeah, and so I think this is absolutely understandable.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's a good way. I was going to wait to ask this question, but Matt Maruka mentioned that you were into studying frequencies, and that led you to the study of light. And I've been playing around. I just bought 100 acres, and it's an underground bunker that I'm building out. I'll be living inside of by next winter. And part of it is an underground pyramid with really cool acoustics.
Mhm.
So I brought singing bowls in there, 7 singing bowls, and I've been playing them. And after you stop playing the bowl, it just reverberates for a good 45 seconds afterwards.
Mhm.
And I always sleep better after, even doing it for 10 or 15 minutes. My sleep that night is improved. And I was really curious your thoughts uh, on that. I guess it would be sound therapy, but specifically I don't know if you've had experience with the quartz singing bowls. Are they just resonating different tissues? That's kind of how I think about it, on how it's having
Yeah,
an effect.
I think the resonance point of view is a very interesting one because it kind of opens all the different doors. Talking about photobiology, we are talking about resonance on a photonic frequency level. But what you can feel, for example, the frequencies, the sizes of the frequency of the wavelengths of color light, they match the distances and sizes inside the cells. And the sizes of the wavelengths you can experience by singing bowls. They match organs, they match parts of your physical body, of the higher hierarchy. And so I'm experimenting with frequencies since decades in the meantime. Starting with the brainwave frequencies, I developed a device, BrainMan, in the late 1980s and early 1990s. It was already existing and approved, and I was kind of experimenting with brainwave frequencies. I just confronted myself with Schumann resonance, with alpha frequencies attuned to the rotating Earth, and so on. Kind of cosmic tuning fork for your brain waves, but The next step was using the singing bowls, but finally I found out, for example, in treating my grandmother, she suffered from bronchitis, and my 4 kilogram singing bowl was just a bit too heavy to have it on her chest. So I started to invent and investigate first, and then invent sound massage tables where you can play all the kind of music you want to play and experience this like you would sit or lie in a large singing bowl. But this is much more versatile than the singing bowls. You can add it or combine it with physiotherapy, with massage, and so on. But this, when you lay upon this sound table, or when you are in your bunker, where you have kind of focused surround experience of the um, sensible frequencies and low frequencies, then your full body experiences what your cell experiences when exposed to differently colored light. This is a kind of picture. I think it's very, you can kind of experience what frequencies can do with your body on this large wavelength level. So it's interesting because the lowest frequencies, the sounds, for example, the bass frequencies, they resonate with our intestines and with our muscles, and so, and the light frequencies, they resonate with our cells and the compartments inside our cells. So it kind of covers the whole electromagnetic spectrum from very low frequencies to very high frequencies. And this is a kind of very comprehensive and holistic combination. So I would really recommend to take some colored light with you into your frequency bunker to improve and increase the intensity and yeah.
Yeah, I was talking to Matt about it, and I definitely want to have either, I think they're called sconces at eye level, or have along the floor lighting. So instead of overhead lighting, since I'm starting from scratch, like it'll be cool to do it right. But I was looking at for daytime doing skylights, like they make like tunnels where the light comes in and then it kind of diffracts out the bottom in a wide spread, so to light hallways and rooms and stuff when the sun or moonlight's out. But yeah, be a fun project for sure. People ask me, do you think the world's going to end? Why are you building a bunker? And I keep saying no, it's to improve my sleep, because I don't know how to describe it yet exactly scientifically. I think you just kind of started to with the frequencies, but sleeping underground, is it like super grounding? Because I've been grounding since 2010 with like a rod to the earth with a bed sheet. But this is, it's different. You're getting more ambient.
So
magnetism.
One thing I could imagine that you kind of seclude or shield yourself from all this surface radiation, cell phone frequencies, and all these things. I don't. How is your how many bars do you have on your smartphone when you're in your bunker?
0 currently. I'm going to either hardwire it or put Wi-Fi in there and then turn it off at night. That's what I do here. I have Wi-Fi and then I goes to sleep at night. But yeah, that's a great point. Up here, there's so many dead zones in the forest. It's 130 acres to myself, so it's very spread out from other buildings and stuff. So I don't pick up other Wi-Fi or. But
yeah, but for example, satellite signals, which can be used, are supposedly present, and going down inside a bunker normally shields your yourself from these man-made um, radiations, but also from the natural windows of radiation. So it's a good idea to crawl out of your bunker from time to time, and I think on a regular basis. So probably for nighttime, it's very good shielding.
Yeah.
And for daytime, I would expose myself to the natural environment above ground.
Yeah. Come out of hibernation. No, the goal is not to make this too much of a tangent, but I'm putting a bioceramic geodesic dome on top. So there'd be a staircase going down into the bunker. So during the daytime, I could stay above ground in a dome.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think one of the coolest parts is there's no wood. So no carpenter ants can't eat my house, and it's resilient to wildfires, which can happen up here. And so there's a lot of benefits, protecting from natural disasters, but
Mm-hmm.
also just longevity. Concrete and ceramic lasts for a long time. But yeah, I kind of brought that up because I've looked at studies, and I wanted to ask you about interesting studies that you've heard over the years, or I mean, just experiments, not studies, of uh, people going underground and altering the light cycle. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but I remember decades ago, a guy went underground and his body adapted to, I think it was a longer day, um, just with only artificial lights. And I know that's really playing with fire when you like isolate yourself like that. But I'm curious if you're if you've looked
These
into
bunker experiments
bunker. Yeah.
in Andex in Germany, they made this experiment or trial with students who wanted to prepare themselves to an examination, and so they had a chance to stay in the bunker where they had been shielded from any communication with the outer world, and they could demonstrate um, that the circadian rhythm kind of resembled the culmination period of the moon, which is the same position of the moon the next day, which is about 25 hours.
Oh.
And once they started to shield also the magnetic fields, the circadian rhythm became free running. So there was no synchronization signal left, which had been taken over by the moon as they removed the normal 24-hour cycle. I would have to look it up, this study, and I'm not even sure if it's published in English, but I'm pretty sure that I have the German publication at hand.
That'd be good for me to know moving into a bunker. Look at what people have done. Interesting. I wanted to ask you about sauna therapy because that is infrared light, and I think it's really beneficial for just detoxification in general, metals and compounds and synthetic compounds that we accumulate, fire retardants and different things. And I've tried incandescent light saunas. Mostly I have experience with the black carbon emitters, just the standard box saunas. But living off grid like I have most of the last 4 years, I've fell in love with the wood burning, like traditional Finnish sauna where you have the rocks and you just pour water over and it's steam, but I actually have to build a fire below it. And I don't know if it's just the ritual, but that one makes me feel the best.
Yeah.
And I like that it uses no electricity. So if the world ends, I could still sweat.
Yeah, and you with all the electrical saunas, you automatically invite dirty electricity because you don't really want to have the 60 hertz modulation on your heat or near infrared or infrared B and C signals. But this is inevitably the case. I was in contact with someone who makes saunas, and I also investigated the option of running the emitters on direct current. This is not very common, or it's kind of complicated. You have to put transformers into cascade, kind of stacking them that you reach the 110, 120 volts. So it's technically possible to do it, but it's not feasible. Because it's much more complicated to have a kind of DC power source, which is necessary to produce the amount or the dose, the radiation dose. And from that perspective, it's for sure the best to use fire in order to produce the heat. Talking about saunas is not that easy because you have near infrared saunas, you have so luminous heat ray saunas as a synonymous expression. You have saunas with an emphasis on the ultraviolet, on the infrared B. And for example, the Finnish saunas with these hot stones produce even longer wavelengths. And here we cross the border from photobiomodulation with the near infrared to kind of mere or purely surface based stimulation, which causes your body to sweat because the heat is another. Heat can be compared with the erythema on the short wavelength part of the spectrum. This is used for sensing the UV part in the form of solar erythema, and the tangible or feelable heat on the other side of the spectrum is also a detection and protection signal. And this produces profuse sweating, which is the result of a superficial stimulation and a connected reflex. The penetration depth of infrared B and infrared C is less than a millimeter compared to the penetration depth of a luminous heat ray sauna, which is much, much wider. So you come into the depth several centimeters deep with near infrared radiation, but only superficial on the top. But this causes the vegetative system to react in certain reflective or reflex patterns. And I think it's not just by a random occurrence that in the Baltic region, where you have these long winters, that they kind of replace the skin stimulation, which is not possible via sunlight, with the other end of the spectrum. Both interventions keep your skin busy and prevent your skin from becoming lazy. And so I think this is a good idea for winter time, not to travel to the southern parts of the world where you have a lot of sunlight, which is not natural for those who have been born in the regions with clear seasons. But the thermal stimulation, the pure thermal stimulation, partly can replace the full spectrum stimulation we normally experience sometimes from solar exposure.
That's awesome. Yeah, I definitely feel more drawn to the sauna in the winter, and then in the summer, I feel more drawn to jumping in the cold water because it just feels natural when it's 90. It gets up into the 90s up here in the summer for a month or so. And so jumping in cold water feels amazing. And that's kind of how I do it. I know some people cold plunge year round. I don't know your thoughts on that.
I was not listening to your last sentence because my dog kind of starts becoming nervous. So could you hear her? No,
I cannot. No, but why I'll just go to that question then because it's related to animals. So, probably about, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, I read a book called Anti-Aging by Sang Wang, and he was talking about all these longevity strategies in the book. But one of them was a section on infrared light, and he talked about saunas, but then he talked about sleeping next to somebody, like having, a partner increases your longevity because your infrared light, and I don't know the physics behind it, instead of just sending it out, it's actually bouncing off the individual. Curious your thoughts if there's any validity to that. And I sleep with my black cat on my chest every morning. He just crawls up on me, and I get the purring effect. But there's also the warmth. Is there anything to that idea of the infrared overnight when you're sleeping having a benefit? If does it reflect off another individual, a human or a pet?
Yeah, when I think back, let me probably 25 years ago, in summertime, I decided to shave my head to get rid of my hair. And the interesting thing is that I could sense people standing behind me, which I was not able to with my isolating or insulating hair before. And so, yes, when sensitized, you can feel the emission from people. For example, by removing the insulating layers, which normally prevent you from these sensations. And I know that there were times, some very dark times in Germany in the 1940s, early 1940s, where they just submerged people, prisoners, in ice cold water, and then they tried to warm them up with living human bodies, compared to just a standard electrical heating appliance. But in fact, we are leaving the scientific realm, definitely, because I am not aware of recent research. But I have one presentation online which is only available in German, unfortunately. But in this presentation, I investigate the human laser, which is, for example, represented in your hands. The capillaries in your skin, they are kind of upright standing, pointing to the outside. And the erythrocytes inside these capillaries, they could act as the etalon of a dye laser, a pigment laser. And a pigment laser is a tunable laser. When you change the dimension of the grid or the etalon, the wavelength changes. And the erythrocytes, when they are compressed inside the capillary, they elongate, or they kind of circle back to a round-shaped structure. But if they are kind of aligned in a pearl-like alignment, they kind of provide a bed for certain different wavelengths depending on their kind of outer shape and their alignment within this capillary. And this could resemble a kind of photonic crystal or dye laser principle, where only assorted wavelengths are able to pass, and others would not be able to pass through this photonic filter. So theoretically, there should be a difference, because the warmth and the heat which is able to leave your body has to be sorted or brought into a higher order in order to dissipate from your body. Otherwise, the water in your bloodstream would keep these wavelengths and would not let them loose as easy as they can leave our body. And we are talking about wavelengths around 10,000 nanometers here, which are not really beneficial for our photonic metabolism anymore. So they have to be emitted in order to let higher ordered radiation in again. So it's like an exhaust of a car, where the decomposed substances have to leave the system before a new fuel injection is able to unfold the reaction chain again. So you still can, or even can, look at our photonic system in this regard. And so, yes, in fact, I think that the heat, the emission of a mammal has a higher order and quality compared to the heat emission of an electrical appliance, for example, electrical heater.
But I did the same thing, by the way. One summer, I shaved my head bald with the intention to get more sunlight to my brain, and it definitely had an effect. I think it's easier to do when you're a man. I don't think a woman would want to do that.
So they have to be, we tell them.
Yeah. I wanted to circle back. There were so many things I wanted to ask you about, but the BrainMan device that you developed, because I think it's cool that someone like yourself is open to technology like that, because I just see a demonization of, if it's battery operated and it's going to your head or your brain, it's detrimental. It's like this extremist viewpoint that we've been kind of touching on the whole show that you've been bringing up. Years ago, I found a company from Canada called SOTA. I think they've been around for 3 decades or something. And they worked with Bob Beck, not Becker, but Bob Beck, who I think he had a lot of inventions and patents, but he created like a blood cleaner using 50 to 100 microamperes, like micropulsar, which I've used when I'm sick. And he released a patent. So he's like, go to Radio Shack and build it yourself. But this company made an affordable one, and 9-volt battery that powers it. But the reason why I do all this context is they had a device called the biotuner, which connects to your ear. What's that?
BT6 brain tuner.
I think. Yep. Yeah. I think it's 111 hertz, but harmonics, and I've given it to friends with insomnia.
Of 111 and another frequency, and they claim that they have more than 200 beneficial frequencies, but just by blending these two. Yeah. So the BrainMan I was building in the late 1980s was kind of following a bit different idea or philosophy, because most of these brain tuner machines, they followed a constant current principle, and I was following a constant voltage principle in order to keep the harmonic composition stable. For example, my device, the BrainMan, produces a square shaped waveform, and this means you have a certain amount of harmonics. So the uneven full multiples of the basic frequency. Let's say you would set the device to 1 hertz. You also get 3 hertz, 5 hertz, 7 hertz, 9 hertz, and so you have a whole bunch of different frequencies which relate to the basic frequency the device is set to. And there is a kind of harmonious stabilization by using these square waves. So I had not this big amount or large amount of frequencies resulting from 2 basic frequencies, but I was using a specific waveform. And to keep the number of harmonics stable, it was necessary to not change the voltage, because the voltage defines the waveform. And so in other words, other devices, they followed the principle that the amount of electrons is important. And my device followed the principle that the information provided is important, and not the amount of electrons flowing through the body, because somehow I've had the feeling that pressing a certain amount of electrons through the system is a kind of raping the system, or kind of overwhelming it. And my idea also was to set the device to a certain constant frequency, so that you can learn your brain can learn what this frequency means. And I was using frequencies derived from natural oscillations, like the 24-hour rotation of the Earth, like the 365 days of the year, the Platonic year, which is almost 26,000 years, the trembling through the dancing of the Earth axis through the how do you call it? Tierkreis is the German word, and it's the Capricorn and the.
I know what you're talking. Yeah.
How would you call this?
Is it the solar? Not the
the zodiac, or it's the
yeah.
So the Platonic year is the highest, the slowest rotation of the Earth axis, and the year surrounding the sun and circling or spinning around the own axis is the day. So these are 3 frequencies of the Earth. The day.
Oh, the great year, I think it's called, or something.
The great year. The Platonic year is another expression for that. Yeah. And the 24 hours, if you octave it, it gives you red. And if you octave or transpose it in the rotation around the sun, our Earth year, octaved into the visible part of the electromagnetic spectrum, gives you a green, and the Platonic year gives you the violet. So interestingly, our Earth movements, the 3 different types of our Earth movement, give you both ends of the visible spectrum at the center, red, green, and violet.
Wow.
And so you can not only transpose it or octave it into the visible range of the electromagnetic spectrum, but also downwards to the brainwave frequencies and also the audible frequencies. So I was working with tuning forks. I was working with singing bowls, which had been selected so that they exactly match these natural frequencies. Yeah, so a completely different topic, but on the other hand, exactly the same, or just the same on another octave.
Yeah, yeah, definitely all connects. I wanted to ask your thoughts on that stuff because I have a lot of experience with various devices and mostly little small ones, like even an ultrasonic one. I don't know if you remember Patrick Flanagan and or maybe you looked at like John Lilly and Lilly Waves, but it was using 40 kilohertz ultrasound. And
Mm-hmm.
I actually played that into my sensory deprivation float tank with like 1,200 pounds of magnesium sulfate and running
Mm-hmm.
the ultrasound through the water and uh, yeah, wild experiments. But it's amazing what we can do to our physiology using frequencies and
Mm-hmm.
sound and ultrasound. Just a whole nother thing that's fascinating to me. But um, so yeah, bringing it back to to the topic of light specifically, um, I think you kind of shine light on the idea that vitamin D is only a small aspect. Vitamin D synthesis is only a small aspect of the benefits of UV, right? Like you mentioned, all of the
Mm-hmm.
hormones near the beginning of the show: serotonin, dopamine, cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline. Do you think there's cases where some people can benefit from supplementing vitamin D? I mean, mostly over the years, I've been against it and talking about deficiency in the cofactors, specifically magnesium, which is needed to convert it. And I think most people are deficient in that mineral. That can have really deleterious effects for the heart and creating arrhythmias and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I know during the pandemic or whatever you want to call it, bioweapon, everyone was shouting, megadose, megadose, take 50,000, 100,000 IUs of vitamin D. Do you think that caused a lot of harm during that time? Or
I don't think so. I'm not convinced that it's the same to ingest vitamin D compared to the dermal photosynthesis, because in the latter case you have a lot of you have numerous reaction chains and protective effects even before the vitamin D precursors reach bloodstream. So the natural way to to produce or to get enough vitamin D for sure is sunlight, but still we have some natural examples where, for example, Inuit they probably cannot produce enough vitamin D because it's just too cold to stay out in the sun naked, so they have to protect themselves. So their supplements come from sea fish, from liver, from other mammals they are hunting. So you can for sure survive just based on vitamin D supplementation.
fish liver, right? Cod liver is a big one.
Cod liver, yeah.
Mhm.
Mm, is a kind of natural one, but this is not the life in Arctic region is not a blueprint for living in other parts of the world. So yes, you can survive based on supplementation, but no, you don't get all the benefits from supplementation. And of course, there is a certain risk. And people have proven that they can stand and survive daily doses of 10,000 and 50,000 and probably even 100,000. Mm, to me, it is kind of heroic experiment. I would not recommend to to make these experiments, because we all know that the fat-soluble vitamins, they store up, and from a certain degree on or concentration on, they can become deleterious. There are people with genetic composition who are not able to digest or to process vitamin D in the same way than others. So I think these the levels you can reach by supplementation are not natural anymore, and you kind of circumvent the true reason and meaning of vitamin D. For me, vitamin D is not throughout the year vitamin which needs always the same level in your bloodstream. For me, it's a seasonal stress hormone. And again, when stress hormones like the catecholamines prepare ourselves for locomotion tasks during daytime, as long as we are outside and not sitting only in front of our keyboards. In the same way, vitamin D is a seasonal stress hormone, which, because calcium is the calcium metabolism is controlled by vitamin D, and calcium is the element of locomotion. Calcium is the transmitter of the nerve signals in your muscles, and calcium is required for building up the strength of your bones in terms of adapting to increased motorical stress and so on. So if you look at this from this perspective, it all makes perfect sense. And so if it's a seasonal stress hormone and you live under the influence of varying seasons, then it's a good idea to also allow variations in the concentration of this hormone.
Yeah, I've been playing around with narrowband UV light, and I know the Spurti, I don't use that one anymore, but I was using that for years, which has the UVA, UVB. I think they're Philips bulbs. But now I've been playing around with the 311 nanometer UVA and UVB, and I just do 5 minutes front, 5 minutes back every day. Are you not a fan?
Not at all, because this is not the narrowband UVB was not made for vitamin D production. There was another intended use, and this is the treatment of psoriasis.
Right. Yeah.
So chronic eczema.
And I grew up with eczema, so maybe that's my excuse.
Pardon?
But I grew up with eczema. That mostly comes up with stress. I haven't had it in years, but I remember scratching on my inner elbow till it bled and just very itchy, and that was my
maybe for you it's okay, but the highest yield in vitamin D production is found at 296 or 297 nanometers, and you are you have to calculate a lot. You have to do a lot of math tricks to come to a conclusion that narrowband UVB with 311 nanometers is a good idea to produce vitamin D. It is maybe a little bit too complicated to delve into to this topic in this framework here, but it is it was mainly a marketing concept to feature this product, and the broadband, very sharp UVB enhanced light sources. They were kind of dangerous, if not absolutely strictly controlled regarding exposure time. So the tolerance against the 311 is much better. So it has a better safety profile, but a worse vitamin D, much worse vitamin D yield.
Okay.
And again, we are on the edge then, because you have to extend the exposure time with 311 nanometers, but it's still undecided from one to the other individual if you get the desired yield in vitamin D production, for example.
Mm.
So it's not aggressive as the short wavelengths UVB, the broadband UVB. So for me, the ultraviolet lux is the best artificial light source, solar simulation, but I don't even know if it's available for 110 or 112 volts. And it was invented in the 1930s, and it's a combination from a mercury discharge, medium pressure discharge lamp with an incandescent lamp. And it has been used for medical purposes, but also, for example, for paint aging in the automotive industry. If you want to learn if a paint withstands the sunlight over time, the best solar radiation simulator I know.
Interesting. Yeah, I know a lot of people use like the reptile bulbs. That's probably not good.
Yeah, no, they are, as long as they are based on the ultraviolet lux design, then this is round about 7 times the intensity of natural sunlight in warmer regions, which means with 5 to 7 minutes on each side, 3 times a week, for example, you can be sure that you will not develop a vitamin D deficiency.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah, it almost sounds simpler to just not worry about it in the winter if you if you live in a northern climate like I do. Because it just fluctuates, like you said, right? It's supposed to go up in the summer and then down in the winter.
And flattening of these oscillations always means you are closer to some disorder and farther away from health, because health means oscillation, and oscillation with a good amplitude is the preferred dynamic state to be in.
What is your opinion on the whole red light therapy industry as a whole? Because they're I know a lot of it is using, was it 660 and 850? At least that's where they started, and now companies have 4 wavelengths, 8 wavelengths, and they're, I think, quasi-monochromatic, if I understand. So it's like 15 nanometers roughly on either side of
I
that.
would
But
call
you're
it
still getting
oligochromatic.
Okay.
Oligochromatic, because monochromatic is a laser, ideally a gas laser, and maybe also a dye laser, but the solid state lasers, diode lasers, for example, they are not monochromatic because it's also a bell-shaped curve with a certain range which is covered. But the LEDs I would call oligochromatic. So this is something between broadband and monochromatic. You just have a narrower bandwidth, still with a center, clearly defined center wavelengths. But what is my opinion on that? I'm developing a photobiomodulation unit, or together with Matt Maruka.
Put me on the list. Yeah.
We
Put me on the list.
we hope to release it soon. It turned out to be quite a project to make something really good. In my understanding, a lot of companies or manufacturers, they just go for the highest intensity possible. And here from my point of view, this can be a problem, because with the near infrared and the red light therapy and photobiomodulation, we now have LEDs at hand which have spectral irradiance which exceeds the levels of sunlight by several factors. So if we are working with 10 times the intensity or 20 times the intensity which can be found in sunlight, the problem is with these oligochromatic spectra compared or in opposite to the broadband spectrum. In sunlight, all the different wavelengths and intensities are kind of linked and entangled. And when we put out or take out certain wavelengths and amplify them by a factor of 10, we cannot be sure that our protective mechanisms are still capable of handling these powers. So due to the fact that there is no thermal alarm clock existing in these spectra, the risk of overdosing is always there. And what I kind of witnessed in the last years, and I'm involved in the photobiomodulation scene since 2010 or so. So I was, I think, the first to publish a full body photobiomodulation peer-reviewed study in 2012. We did not use LEDs, but a very specific discharge lamp, which was tailor-made for producing the cytochrome C oxidase absorption ranges, so kind of Tina Caro related tailor-made spectrum to address the cytochrome C oxidase on one hand, on the other hand also water activation without increasing the thermal effects, but having the maximum benefit on the metabolical amplification on the molecular level. And here again we have some intensity windows which match our biological capabilities, and if you shoot over these windows, it does not mean that the stronger and stronger and stronger intensity means that you have a better and better and better effect. For example, skin regeneration, rejuvenation. If you want to have a short effect, then you can use very high intensities. You will create a subtle inflammatory response, and you can measure less fine lines and wrinkles, but it will backfire. There will be a backlash after a certain while, so you cannot pull or activate the inflammatory reaction as often as you want, because replacement of cells goes along with shortening of telomeres and so on and so on. So the ideal treatment is kind of subliminal, that you should not expect gigantic effects from photobiomodulation, because photobiomodulation is a normalization. You want to bring back balance and coordination into the system. And being balanced is not how does it feel if you are normalated? It just feels normal. There's no excessive strength in your feelings. It's just, yeah, if you don't feel bad and you don't feel good, but you feel normal, you are in a very good situation to react in one or the other direction. But it's not how would you say? Sometimes I'm missing the words. It's not a sensational experience. And if you expect a sensational experience, you have to increase the intensities. But here you are leaving the secured and well-secluded zone of harmonious and natural interaction. And yeah, maybe so far so good in regard to photobiomodulation.
I think a lot of the marketing, like men measuring their testosterone increasing by exposing the Leydig cells to the test, that's a big, I guess sex cells, right?
It went through the media. But when you talk about this with some serious scientists, they will just kind of be very skeptical about it.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, you can, for example, if there is a malfunction, or if there is a hypofunction, you can normalize this. And if there is a hyperfunction, you also can normalize this. But normal men are not running on a hypofunction in a way. Normally, you can be sure that each organism tries to balance itself out. And so if there is not a clearly defined disease, you should not expect sensational results in a way that you just increase your testosterone over a naturally beneficial range.
Mm-hmm.
And with the intensities provided by some of the photobiomodulation systems, you could even lower your concentration on number of sperms, because heating up the tissue is never a good idea. And this is the backlash from overdosing near infrared. The tissue is not prepared for these irradiances and doses, which can be emitted by modern, not well-designed devices. And it might be okay for 99% of the users, but one user from out of 100 will probably experience some very deleterious results. And I can tell from studies from the 1930s, where university professors in Switzerland were able to run these trials in terms of overdosing near infrared. We have no warning signals, and if you exceed the spectral radiation of the solar radiation by a factor of 3 or 4, the result can be a very serious damaging of the tissue, which heals up in absolutely slowed down and retarded speed, because the penetration depth, which is the advantage of the near-infrared radiation, can become a big disadvantage if overdosed. Because the depth of the tissue in the dermis and subdermal layers is not prepared for such damage, because the heat which is felt under sunlight exposure normally induces the creature to stop exposure at this certain point. And this warning signal is lacking, and so, yeah.
Wow. You probably remember the Quantlet. I think they stopped selling it, but mine broke. But it was the wrist device that shined light into the wrist. And you might know Weber Medical. I think they're a German company or around Germany, but they have a watch. There's a few companies where it's like LEDs that you strap to your wrist. Are you familiar with those? And do you think those are safer? Because the intensity would be much less, and you're just dosing the blood at that point, right? Instead of general tissue.
I'm a fan of chrome therapy, so I would not rely on just the small surface of the wrist, but treat larger areas of the body, and this with certain colors, with different colors. And this is something I do for more than 30 years now, and I'm a fan of it because it's not only red or near infrared, it's not only stimulating the energy metabolism, and so it's you have a toolbox of in the system I'm working with of 12 different colors, and you can select these colors for each and every purpose. And for example, treating yourself with scarlet full body exposure might be even more effective regarding testosterone or sexual functions, and so compared to shining photobiomodulation light on the testicles.
So what does that look like? Is it a lens that goes in front of a light? I know this is probably getting where it gets complex, but I know there are some companies, I can't remember the name of is it the Dinshaw Gaudiali? There's a colored.
It's exactly Dinshaw spectrochrome, yes. This is what I'm working with since around about 30 years now.
It's definitely not as sexy as the LED devices, right? But it works.
The thing is, the colored light from LED devices normally works based on the RGB or RGBA, red, green, and blue color mixing. And if you want to have violet, then in printing violet, the impression of violet can be achieved by mixing blue and red. But mixing blue and red does not give you violet, because violet is the end of it's the very short wavelengths end of the visible spectrum. So violet has nothing to do with red. Blends from red and violet are called magenta, if you have a 50% blend, or scarlet if the red dominates, or purple if the violet dominates. The RGB on the cellular level cannot provide violet because the spectrum ends with blue. There is no indigo and there is no violet possible to produce with RGB, because it's made for vision purposes, and our eye is not able to really discern or discriminate blue, indigo, and violet, because it just becomes darker in the appearance. But the eye is not able to tell if the wavelengths become shorter and shorter and shorter. It has to be the case for the cellular effect. And for example, yellow with the RGB is just red and green in a certain ratio, but it's never 590 nanometers.
Interesting.
So when we then think back to the dimensions in the cell, the nanometers can be found in the dimensions of cell organelles. For example, the smallest mitochondria are spherical and they have a diameter of 500 nanometer. So with green light, you shake only the smallest mitochondria. And with 800 nanometers, you are shaking the larger tubular mitochondria. And with 2000, you are shaking the largest mitochondria. And so on. We have vacuoles in the cells which are responsible for the protein production and transportation. And for example, 400 nanometers or 450 nanometers, if they are dominating the vibratory space inside the cell, then you can kind of influence the size of the vacuoles which can build up. And so the colors by resonance, by topological resonance, can directly influence cellular metabolism. And this means that you need all the discrete wavelengths. You need turquoise, which is not blended from blue and green. You need a turquoise, which resembles, let's say, 490 nanometers, because this is a very specific topological information, which cannot be simulated by blending or mixing green and blue. For the yellow, for the orange, for the lemon, you need a broadband spectrum, and then filters which take away all you don't need and leave what you need in the resulting spectrum. And this is how spectrochrome works. And here the task was to overcome the problems resulting from the bending of the bulb. The incandescent lamp as a perfect broadband emitter with a natural spectral energy distribution. These broadband bulbs are not available anymore, and so the task or the challenge was to find LEDs which provide this broadband spectrum in the visible range and then combine them with the filters. It's not so sexy because you cannot push the button and change the colors like that. You need frame holder for the filters, and you need a small light source or a larger light source, but filters mean if you have a light source as large as this computer screen, you also need large filters. So for better handling, it's ideal to have small filters which can be handled easily, combined with the frame holder, the filter holder, and the light source and emitter. And then the results I get with these hybrid spectrochrome unit, hybrid because I'm using solid state lighting on one hand, but still the old fashioned filter gels, which always have been in use in the last decades in combination with the incandescent lamps. And one great advantage is that I can change the color temperature of first, so I can adjust, for example, green with a little bit longer wavelengths or a little bit shorter wavelengths. I can kind of fine-tune and tweak the spectrum even better compared to the incandescent lamp. And for some purposes, it's important to have the more infrared than the standard LEDs are able to provide. And in this case, I have the additional near-infrared emitters to fill up what the standard visible LEDs cannot provide.
Wow. So you can't use incandescent lights behind the filters because it would get too hot. Is that correct? So you're
You
using
can,
LEDs.
but you are
Oh,
limited to the. So you would. The problem is per surface. How do you say this? If you want to use more than a 20 watt bulb, you
oh,
have to increase the surface of the filter. And if you want to use 100 watts or 500 watts, you have to increase,
oh,
enlarge the filter surface. Or you have to use fans for cooling, which is
oh.
annoying if you have rotating electromagnetic fields, which result from the fans, and so on and so on.
Hmm.
So the lack of mid and long wavelength infrared in a good high quality LED for white light is beneficial to the filters. But still, you have to take care that you don't exceed the thermal capacity of the filters, even with the best LEDs.
Oh.
It's a science on its own, in a
I
way.
could see why it's taking a while to develop a product that's relatively easy to use, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Have you seen? I wanted to interview the founder I found years ago. This company where he just sells colored glasses, just non-prescription, but you can wear indigo, magenta, blue. This is different from blue blocking glasses, just colored. And I played around with it a few years ago, and I did notice, especially in the winter, it changed my state of mind pretty quickly. Have you
Mhm.
personally experimented with that or read about
With
it, or just
with
different colored lenses just for changing your mental state and mood and
Yeah,
um
I have designed a full set of spectrochrome color glasses,
oh,
so they exactly match the spectrochrome colors you normally would use for full body or body tonation. These colors are also available for in the form of glasses.
oh,
Yeah.
that's profound. How I was not expecting. I mean, within 5 minutes, I felt my brain felt different. It was
Yeah, you
quick.
can. Are you familiar with these after images? For example, when you stare at a red spot, and then the red spot is removed, and you look at a white surface,
Oh,
so you get the after image, which resembles or reveals the opposite color. For example, for the red, something like turquoise would appear on the white surface afterwards. This demonstrates how swiftly the metabolism in your retina responds to the red color, because this is a biochemical effect. It's not only a tuning effect in your retina, it is a sheer biochemical reaction. So this already demonstrates, or this example demonstrates how swiftly we adapt not only biophysically but also biochemically to different colors. And this is an experiment I normally present during my workshops to demonstrate people, or to make it clearer to them that it's that vision, for example, it's yeah, we physically react upon the influence of colors. And this is just one small little aspect.
Yeah. And most people are probably unaware of it, right? I mean, especially people dealing with chronic illness, it's not even in their awareness, their relationship with color and light. And It's
Have you
incredible.
heard of the Flexner report?
I have.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So you you have all the information you need to understand why people are focused on biochemical interventions.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, I did have listener questions at the end here. Do you just want to go through a few of the good ones here that listeners sent in to ask you? Uh, my friend John asked, "How do we maximize the benefits of light doping?"
Of what?
Light doping. I don't know what the context of the question is,
I
but
cannot see direct benefits of light doping at the moment. So there is mm, I would recommend to read a paper from an author named Gracia. The it's the I cannot cite the title exactly, but I'm happy to share the paper after our meeting. It's in it sounds like that the probable reason for all civilizatory diseases and the limits of pleasure. And the maximizing idea has always a price. You don't have to pay the price immediately, but most of the time afterwards. And light doping as a what I understand when I hear light doping, the term light doping, I associate this with human-centric lighting. This is what employers do when they are using blue enriched light um, in a production line or where things are manufactured, or even in the offices where they increase the color temperature in order to increase productivity of people. So this, in my understanding, is light doping, but thinking back to times gone by. And I think even nowadays, to bring sports people for training purposes into elevated places where you have increased solar radiation, you have reduced oxygen concentration in the air. These two parameters also could be understood as a kind of doping. So exposing yourself to ultraviolet radiation can have a performance enhancing effect, but you also always have to make a benefit risk ratio assessment.
makes sense. Yeah, this is from my bodybuilder friend, so that was probably in the context of weightlifting. Well, Dr. Alexander, this has been awesome. I know you're running out of time, and we're already at 2.5 hours or so. So um, we'll definitely have to do a part two. This has been maybe my favorite conversation of the year. I've had so much fun. I think you're brilliant, and I love the way that you explain things. So thanks so much for coming on the show, and let's do it again, maybe early next year if you're
So
open to that.
then it will be much easier to say it is the conversation of the year. But if you say it in December, it's just something. Oh wow! Thank you very much, Matt. It was my pleasure to be your guest, and I really would like to be part of the next part.
Incredible. Well, thank you so much. Do you want to send anyone anywhere or any website or anything, or just search your name on YouTube and podcasts if they want to learn more?
I have a Vimeo account,
Oh, cool.
vimeo.com/Alexander Wunsch in one word. There you can find some of my audiovisual presentations, also in English. And yeah, I think this represents a good part of what I I'm doing and what I did in the last years and decades. So yeah, this is, I think, a place to go to learn more about some of the details we had not been able to broaden or deepen or elucidating in our actual conversation.
Yeah, I can't remember when you posted your lectures on Vimeo, but I must have seen them in 2017 or so, and it blew my mind. I mean, 90% of it was over my head, but I re-listened to it several times, and that helped. So, yeah, thank you so much. Let's do it again soon, and stick around so we close out the show. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, that was definitely one of my favorite episodes of the year, which is saying a lot because it's the end of the year. I really learned a lot speaking with Dr. Alexander, and I feel like he just kept correcting me during the show about the melanin types and then about the red light therapy being quasi-monochromatic, which one of my former guests told me that. And then also with the narrowband ultraviolet light therapy that he's not a fan of and doesn't believe increases vitamin D production, which I'll be testing with the spectrophotometry oligoscan to see if it actually does. So without taking cholecalciferol, vitamin D3 supplement, I'm going to see if just by using a narrowband UV light, UVA, UVB combo, if I can increase my tissue levels of vitamin D. So stay tuned for that. I'll be updating people probably on Instagram. But I consider Dr. Alexander a purist, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not dissing him by saying that by any means. I think we need people on all parts of the spectrum in the health community. And I've experienced benefits from LED red light therapy. I've experienced benefits from like the incandescent bulbs over the years. So I like it all. I think everything has its place, and it can't hurt to get more nuanced with our understanding of all of these things, of timing, what are we using them for. I really can't wait to see what Dr. Alexander and Matt Ruka come out with as far as advanced light therapy devices, because he's talking about Dinshaw Gadiali and, as he calls, solid state lighting and using colored lenses, which to my knowledge, you have to DIY it at this point. There's no company that sells you a kit that's just plug and play. And if it's not plug and play, most people are not going to bother with the complex DIY setup. So I think there is a need for a plug and play, easy to use product that incorporates the ideas of Dinshaw Gadiali, which I've talked about on my podcast in the past. I'll put the Vimeo link below if you want to check out the old lectures that are still very relevant with Dr. Alexander Wunsch in the show notes. Highly recommend listening to the lecture entitled Living Photons, How Light Controls Matter. It's an hour and 24 minutes. It was recorded in 2012. Just really great information there. And also just go and listen to interviews with Dr. Alexander. There was a great one recently that Matt Maruka hosted, which was 4 hours long. And that's really great to listen to if you have a long car ride. My website is matt-blackburn.com. I made a CLF protocol, stands for calcification, lipofuscin, and fibrosis. It's a very non-invasive and gentle protocol to bring more balance to the human body. Those are three things that accumulate over time, and there's certain nutrients that get depleted with them accumulating in the body, namely magnesium, vitamin K2, vitamin E are big ones. So I include my solutions there in that article at the top of the page there. You can also see all of my recommended products, and that's a great place to Christmas shop. Actually, recently I've been Christmas shopping using my own website, just thinking about what my family and friends can use. Then my brand is called Mitolife. You can find that at mitolife.co. As of yesterday, the front page was updated. So if you scroll down, check out the Know the Difference section where we compare Mitolife with your average brand that's loaded with fillers, uses pixie dusting of ingredients, like more ingredients, the better kind of idea, that don't have third-party lab testing, that use low-quality ingredients like inactive forms of vitamins, and the bottles are not biodegradable. So they add to the plastic continents in the ocean. And that is in contrast to ours, which don't have fillers, use the right dosages, third-party lab tested, the right forms of nutrients, and bio bottles, which are actually biodegradable. So I spent extra. I invested more than $250,000 into these bottles to upgrade the game and really raise the bar, the standard for supplement companies. A lot of companies now are just doing pouches to avoid this whole mess. I prefer bottles with lids, and I was really excited to find these bio bottles that, under the influence of ultraviolet light and bacteria such as found in a landfill, it'll break down in a relatively short amount of time versus all of your other supplement bottles out there, which end up in landfills and just add to the crazy amounts of plastic that disrupts our hormones and that just takes thousands of years to break down. I recently updated the spore-based probiotic product to include bacteriophages, so that's called Floriform on the website. And I changed the capsule over to Dr. Caps, which is an acid-resistant capsule, so it gets deeper down the intestinal tract, takes roughly 30 to 45 minutes, and then it breaks open, and you not only get the B. subtilis, quasi, and coagulans spore-based strains, but you also get a bacteriophage blend, and these have really cool effects on the immune system. And I think we need that more than ever, so that's why I put them in there. So that is all for today. Check me out on Instagram, Matt Blackburn, Mitolife on Instagram, to stay up to date with the latest information and new things that I'm experimenting with. I'll probably do one more show before I take a holiday break. So I will see you guys next Friday for a solo show, and stay supercharged.